After winning silver, how important is the remainder of this season to Connor McDavid's legacy? And where do we stand a week out from the trade deadline? Plus, our big games to watch this weekend, all on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everyone, and thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen and for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. I'm Rachel Donner from Locked On Flyers. I'm here each and every Friday with Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. You can find the show over on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get our latest episodes as soon as they're available here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And Connor McDavid, it has an interesting task ahead of him, Gil. And I think that, we look at the game they played last night, certainly a statement game against the LA Kings, winning 8-1 there against their perennial first round opponent. And, LA having just made a deal for Panarin and, trying to get back into it. Like this was like a no, you sit down kind of game from the Oilers, right? And it just, you look at Connor McDavid in the context of all of this and coming back from the Olympics with a silver medal, not what he wanted, very obviously, right? And you look at the last 2 seasons of being the second place team, losing that final game, right? So that's kind of 3 big moments in a row for Connor McDavid where he's come out on the wrong side of things. And it just does make you wonder, given kind of how the NHL clock ticks, like how important is this season in particular now to Connor McDavid's legacy?
Well, I think it's very important when you consider that, he will turn 30 next season. And the window for this Edmonton Oilers team, the way it's presently constructed, probably doesn't have that much longer to go. So, I think it's this year or bust, more or less, unless he changes teams or if the Oilers pull off a very fast retool on the fly. And,
Right.
There are still some issues on this Oilers team that they have not yet straightened out.
Yeah. And that's the thing is that, obviously when you look at individual legacy in a team sport, it's not just on you, right? So you have to have the right team around you to make it happen. And you almost look at the Olympics and say that was the perfect scenario for him, because in theory, that's the best possible team around him. And they still came in second, right? And so from his perspective, you got to be thinking, what do I got to do? Now, he was partially responsible for the, overtime loss there.
Right.
But, that aside to some degree, I think it's got to be weighing on him extremely heavily. And that, like, is this a time where he can and has the ability to kind of get back on the horse and carry this team on his back that's very clearly, I think, a little weaker than last year's team. I would say it's probably on par with the first time around on the
Maybe.
Stanley Cup. And then next, like last year, they got a little better, but this year has, I think, despite where they are in the standings, because the standings are just weird this year, I think they're a little bit more uneven.
Well, that, and I think you have teams that have gotten much better in Colorado, right, Minnesota, and Dallas. I mean, those 3 teams have just taken this big step forward. It's a difficult balancing act because it isn't fair to judge an individual solely on winning a championship in a team sport.
Right.
And yet the media
we do that all the
time. And I guess the logic behind it, and I'm not saying it's spot on logic, but the logic behind it is if you really are that good, you will lift the players around you Like if you're really the best, you're gonna lift the players around you and win at least once in your career. And I mean, there are players in hockey and in all sports whose legacies, rightfully or wrongfully, are tarnished because they never won a championship. Marcel Dion in hockey, brilliant player,
right?
Won a scoring championship in the NHL, Hall of Famer, but never even made a Stanley Cup final. His legacy is sort of taken down a peg in a lot of people's minds because he never won a Stanley Cup.
Right. And like on the NBA side, Patrick Ewing is the name that always comes to mind for me, right?
Right.
In terms of individual performance versus legacy in a team sport that, for a Knicks team that just never won, right?
Dan Marino in the NFL, brilliant passer, maybe the best pure passer in NFL history, only went to one Super Bowl, never won it. It does become an issue where it is that missing piece of somebody's legacy. And, fair or unfair, that's kind of where it's at. And, McDavid does have a lot on the line with regard to the fact that he has always been the proverbial bridesmaid, but never the bride.
Yeah. And like I said, I just feel like this Olympic silver is kind of adding to that pile for him. And whether fairly or unfairly, from the outside or from the inside, there has to be an effect here. And, I think this Oilers team in some ways kind of owes it to him.
Yeah.
And you have to think that the pressure on the team around him has now increased, right? Because the expectation here is I think a lot higher for the Oilers. Ultimately, I think that, like I said, this game against the LA Kings was a very strong statement game from them, considering that, right now they're 4-6 in their last 10, like going back to before the break. Like they have to get a little bit more consistency. They're scoring, probably, despite getting 8 last night. I think, they're not going to get 8 every night, but they've got to have high scoring games in order to battle through, because we know they're just not as strong defensively or in goal. And the forwards around him are going to have to score more goals.
Yeah. And I think when you look at sort of the big picture in McDavid's career, I mean, he's got 150 points in 96 career Stanley Cup playoff games. He had 13 points in 6 games at the Olympics this year. I mean, those are outstanding individual numbers. And yet there comes a point where you just say, why hasn't McDavid been able to lead a team to the ultimate glory? At least at the professional and Olympic level. I mean, he's the common denominator eventually, right? I mean,
right.
And how fair that is, I don't know, but certainly the teams around him in Edmonton have had, let's say, some holes in them over the time that he's been there. And defense and goaltending at various times have been at the top of that list. But again, and I think this hung over Alexander Ovechkin until he won one later in his career. It is out there, rightfully or wrongfully, that if you're that good, if you're an all-time great, you should win at least one championship.
Right. And I think that it's the one, right? We don't expect, if a guy's on a team that doesn't have the pieces around him generally, I think we just expect one. And that's it.
Yes.
Some guys that you see surrounded by a lot higher talent in various sports that you're like, you should be winning like a bunch of championships with that group, right? With that core. And you can look at the Oilers that way from a forward perspective, but like we've been talking about, defense also wins championships and goaltending also wins championships. So we get that. But like when you have 100 points for 6 straight seasons in the regular season, and it almost means nothing, like that's a tough pill to swallow.
It is. And hockey, I think, in a lot of ways, the Stanley Cup playoffs are like a separate animal. And the emphasis, you could finish, what were the Oilers? Third in their division one year that they went to the Stanley Cup final. I mean, the regular season is secondary to the playoffs, and playoff success, it's a different animal that's looked at as a different level of hockey, and to fall short throughout your career. Again, is McDavid one of the best ever to suit up and play in the NHL? Yes. But will it tarnish his legacy, rightfully or wrongfully, if he doesn't win a cup? I think it will, to a point.
Yeah. But I think it'll be interesting to see how this season plays out, the remainder, and where the Oilers end up in the playoffs, and what the role of Connor McDavid is from a leadership perspective, trying to carry this team and give it another go in the playoffs. Because if the Oilers get bounced before the Stanley Cup final, like that, it's going to be a huge blow, I think.
And I think you'll see a lot of changes in Edmonton if that happens.
Yeah, I do. I absolutely think so too, because, he for some reason decided he wanted to re-sign with this team, but we'll see if that's the right decision for him. We'll see how the season goes. Speaking of those potential changes, we've got a week left until the trade deadline, and we're going to kind of do a gut check on where we are coming up next.
Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Sponsored Jobs. Indeed, Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves on Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Cold days, packed schedules, and big goals, that's winter for you. And when there's not a lot of time to cook, eating well can feel like another thing on your to-do list, and that's where Factor comes in. Factor makes healthy eating easy with fully prepared meals designed by dietitians and crafted by chefs, so you can eat well without the planning, prepping, or cooking. Factor meals are always fresh, never frozen, and ready in about 2 minutes. They've got a ton of variety with 100 rotating meals each week, so it never gets boring. You get options like high protein, calorie smart, Mediterranean diet, GLP-1 support, and even their new Muscle Pro collection for strength and recovery. It's perfect for those busy weeks when you still want meals that support your goals without the stress. So head to factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off. Use the code LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off and free breakfast for a year. Eat like a pro this month with Factor. New subscribers only. Varies by plan. One free breakfast item per box for 1 year while subscription is active. Thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen of the day. And thanks again for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. And you can join our Everydayer Club to make that experience even more special. Get your favorite team show with no ad interruptions, members only Discord access, and more, all for just $5 a month or $50 a year. But right now, we have an offer for 1 free month using the code DEADLINE. We're just about to talk about the trade deadline. So this is a good time to join and get in on the conversation on that Discord. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer club to learn more. All right. So we do, in fact, have a week to go until the deadline here. And the Edmonton Oilers seem like they're in a position where I'm not sure they can or will make moves heading into the trade deadline. Maybe they will, but they're going to be in competition with a bunch of other teams trying to tweak their lineup here. And, we've already seen kind of LA has essentially made their big move. The Wild already made their big move. Vegas kind of already made their big move too. So, like, who's left and how important is it for them to get in on the action?
It really, I get the feeling that we're going to see one team make a move a day or two before Friday next week. And that's going to be the catalyst that sparks 2 or 3 other teams to get on that bandwagon and make a move to try to counter that big move. And it may very well surround Steven Stamkos, who right now there are all kinds of reports that, he's got a full no movement clause. He has not said that he wants out of Nashville necessarily, but there was a report that the Lightning, the Stars, and the Wild are teams that he would waive his no movement clause for. And obviously gaining an experienced veteran like Steven Stamkos, who has some Stanley Cups on his resume, somebody is going to get a very valuable piece. The question, of course, is at what price?
Yeah, I think that is going to be the big question here, right? Because it's not like you said, Stamkos was like itching to make a move here. So he's going to have a lot of power in this conversation. And with the changes happening in Nashville, with Barry Trotz being on his way out, right?
Yeah.
How much is that going to impact the decision in terms of what's the incentive to do to get the absolute best deal possible versus just making a deal? I think that's an interesting part of the equation with Stamkos as well.
It is. I mean, Trotz is a stand-up guy. I couldn't see him, going halfway and just saying, oh, whatever, I'll just trade the guy. But certainly as a lame duck, maybe that limits what he's willing to do at the trade deadline. I would think he would try to accommodate Stamkos if he does ask for a trade, and I think this is all part of strategy by GMs. He could be saying, oh yeah, he hasn't asked out and we don't have to trade him, to try to jack up the price and just encourage, I need to be bowled over by an offer to move him. And therefore teams have to step up and make that very big offer to the Predators to get Stamkos for the stretch drive.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely going to be a factor here. Stamkos has not had a good season, I would say.
Not by his standards, no.
Not, yeah, exactly. And so would moving to a new location give him some extra juice to maybe change things up, or being in a different scenario, having a slightly different role? I think that would be a really good thing from an academic perspective, as an outside observer, to see it happen.
Yeah, and look, I think certainly if he goes to a contending team and all the teams that were mentioned are, among the top contenders in the league, that's got to give him a little more juice to finish out the season, a little more inspiration to play well, rather than standing pat in Nashville where, they have an outside chance of making the playoffs at best right now.
Yeah, and obviously there's other moves that are going to be made around the league, and it'll be interesting to see where kind of more bubble teams fall in that conversation, or teams that are kind of we talked about the Oilers being the bridesmaid and never the bride. I mean, you have other teams that have been in a similar boat recently in the Carolina Hurricanes and the Dallas Stars, right? They've been so close over the last 5 years or so. Is this the year that whatever they do is going to be the thing that gets them through in the end? And, we've seen the Carolina Hurricanes be a perennial big mover and shaker at the trade deadline, and it's not panned out for them. So, like,
No.
what does it mean for those kind of teams?
And then there are teams that are just sort of on the outside looking in. I'm thinking in the East about Florida and Toronto, where, Florida is 8 points out of a playoff berth. So is Toronto right now. These are teams that have been perennial playoff teams. Do they go all in? Do they stand pat? Do they look to sell, which I think is kind of unlikely? How do those teams handle it? Because as of right now, I think it's more of a seller's market coming up at the deadline. But if, Florida and or Toronto decide to sell, that could tip the balance there.
Yeah. I think that'll be another interesting thing to see is like who sells and how much, right? Because you look at the league and there's only, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 true tanking teams in the league, right? And you say like the Canucks are probably tanking at this point, and then maybe Calgary is tanking. I don't think the Jets want to be tankers, but they could be tankers.
Right.
In this scenario, the Blues, I think, are similar.
The Rangers, maybe?
Based on the letter, I don't know.
They're retooling at the very least.
Right. They're not real tankers, let's say, at this point. But I think
they're rumored to be shopping Trocheck. That would be a big deal.
I don't think so. I mean, Trocheck's not that good this year.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you're getting any, like, what has he been worth this year? Like, what is he worth to a team this year? Not as much.
We may find out very soon.
I mean, he's a good, like, if you need a PK guy, sure, maybe.
Okay.
If that's your weakness, but I don't, like, if you need anything else, like, I don't think he's worth much. But I did just watch him play last night. So
yes, you did.
And I was like, yeah, that's Vincent Trocheck. But I think it is it's going to be interesting to see just how big as sellers that some of these teams are.
No doubt. And like I said, that's going to really impact the market as to, how expensive. If there are fewer sellers out there at the deadline, and if some of those teams that are, the Ottawas, the Nashvilles, if they are buyers, it really tilts the market in one direction or another, drives the prices up or down. If this is a stock market, this week's going to be very interesting.
Yes, it will. And we will be here to talk about it next week here on Locked On NHL. But we do have another week of games to get through before that deadline. Who might be playing their last game for their current team coming up? We're going to talk about 3 big games to watch this weekend coming up next.
Ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into a reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for 2. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock it in. I love futures this time of year, whether it's picking a team to win the championship or grab a conference title. It adds that extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now not only can your pick cash, but it can also send you to the finals. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for a chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
All right, so there is a whole big slate of games scheduled to happen this weekend in the NHL. And tonight, the first one we want to talk about is the Utah Mammoth facing the Minnesota Wild. And, Utah has been a little uneven, I would say, in the second half of the season. thus far and are, trying to stay in this wild card position here. We look at that central division, they're still like 5 points out of the top 3 here. And there's a bunch of teams battling to get back into a wild card position. Where do you see this game in terms of the importance of it?
Well, it is certainly very important for Utah. And I think it's important for Minnesota as well. When you look at Minnesota and Dallas, odds are that's the first round matchup in the Central, 2 versus 3. And right now, Minnesota is a point ahead of Dallas, but Dallas has a game in hand. You want that home ice advantage because that is probably going to be one of the best series in the opening round throughout the playoffs.
Yeah, which, as a side note, is upsetting that it's in the first round. But that being said, both of them are doing everything they can to win this battle, right, for the home ice advantage. In this potential series, they're both on tremendous winning streaks. The Wild have to keep it going in order to stick with it.
No margin for error. Absolutely none. They looked really good last night, and we'll see if they can keep it going.
Yeah. And then on Saturday, the game I'm looking at is the Buffalo Sabres at the Tampa Bay Lightning here. The Sabres have been a huge story in the NHL in this second half of the season, making a true run to try and get into the playoffs for the first time in quite a bit. And the Lightning, I think, have been, they're not surprising that they're good. It's been surprising they've been this good.
Exactly.
In a lot of ways, right? I think, the expectations were a little lower from them this season, and they just keep on trucking. I mean, Vasilevsky has had a lot to do with that, right? But I also think that they've put together just a really strong, complete team. And this is a tough opponent for Buffalo to try and keep it going.
It certainly is. I mean, they have the best goal differential in the Eastern Conference at a +60. That's the second best mark in the NHL. They are deep. They are playing better than I think anyone thought. Like you said, everyone thought they'd be good, but not necessarily this good. And they do have a fairly comfortable 6-point lead in the Atlantic with 2 games in hand on second place Detroit. So, that's a tough one. But Buffalo right now in the first wild card spot, but it's so close and so tight. And, the Sabres have kind of been one of the feel-good stories in the league this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're pretty solid on the road, and they've kept up with who they've needed to and keep winning. And it's, they have like a really solid PK right now going. I think that, their stats are a little bit weighed down by what they were looking like earlier in the season, but just a really strong performance. I think that their win they just got against the Devils was really important for them to reestablish themselves after the break, and we'll see if they can keep it going. But this game I think is going to be a lot of fun to watch. And then our big Sunday game to watch, we have Vegas at Pittsburgh, and we know Pittsburgh obviously is suffering from not having Sidney Crosby in the lineup, but it feels like Evgeny Malkin is like, I got this, y'all. Like, don't worry, right?
Yeah, Malkin stepping up, which she's been known to do when Sidney Crosby is out of the lineup. And, Pittsburgh, they may be without Crosby for 4 weeks, and this is a big test for them. They are, trying to hang on to one of the top 3 spots in the Metro. And Vegas is in a tight race in the Pacific. They're only, 4 points ahead of Edmonton, 5 points ahead of Anaheim. They don't have a lot of margin for error either.
Yeah, and they're on this road trip, and it's important for them to keep up while they're on this road trip so they can head back home and and keep it going. But yeah, I think that this is just an interesting game from a Penn's perspective. I would say more so. I think Vegas does have a little bit of cushion, but there's like a lot of moving pieces and parts to this Pittsburgh team that has also been one of the biggest surprises. I don't know. I'm just going to say it's not as feel good for me personally as the Sabres story here, but coming from the other side of Pennsylvania. But that being said, I think that it is an interesting story, to say the least, that with like almost no expectations for this Pens team. A lot of people had them at the bottom of the division at the beginning of the season. So they certainly have a lot to prove, and they have a lot to do to kind of support their captain while he's away. And we'll see if they can keep it up, but it should be fun.
Yeah, I mean, people thought they were going to be leading one of the leading teams for McKenna, right? They were going to be one of the worst teams in the league. Surprise,
Yep. So it'll be another fun week of NHL action. Like I said, we will be back next Friday to talk trade deadline and cover that as it occurs. Gil will be back on Monday to talk to several hosts from around the NHL channel about how their teams are going coming out of the Olympic break. And have a great weekend, everybody.